Hey, you're listening to the Centre podcast. We're a church based in Dural, Sydney, who love Jesus and so want to make him the centre of our lives, our community, and our world. We're going to learn how to do that right now as we sit down and unpack Sunday's sermon.
Hey everyone, welcome to another week of Banter. This week Murray is not here, so it'll be me, Mitch, rocking it solo today. And today we're going to be talking about the parable of the bags of gold, or as it's traditionally known, the parable of the talents. And one of the things when Murray was preaching, which really helped connect the parable of talents to the broader context of Matthew, was that reminder that this comes in within the context of Jesus' teaching on what's called the Olivet Discourse. And so Olivet Discourse is just the fancy way of saying Jesus' Sermon on the Mount of Olives. So this goes across, it's a large chunk of teaching from Matthew chapter 24 all the way to Matthew chapter 25. And this section of teaching, it's complex, it's difficult, there's lots and lots of different interpretations about how to understand it. But further to give a summary, to kind of help us understand how to understand the parable of the talents within the context of the Olivet Discourse, we'll sort of just get a 10,000 feet view. So essentially what happens in the beginning of Matthew chapter 24, the disciples are there walking along, and they just left the temple, and they notice its beauty. And in Luke 21 talks about this as well. In Luke, he makes reference to the temple directly. In Matthew, it's sort of generically buildings, I'm assuming the city of Jerusalem. And so Jesus says, do you see all these things? That's the buildings. Truly, I tell you, not one stone will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. And so the disciples are naturally wondering, okay, if all the stones are going to be thrown down, i.e. Jerusalem's going to be destroyed, when's this going to happen? And so as the disciples are there on the Mount of Olives, they come to him privately and ask, and this is from verse 3, it goes, tell us, they said, when will this happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And so there's sort of a few parts to this question. It is what makes the Olivet Discourse so complex. So you got part one of the question is, tell us when will this happen, i.e. when will the stones that either in the temple or the city will be, thrown down? What will be the sign of your coming? So this is Jesus' second return, and of the end of the age. So you so at the end of the age, Jesus' return, that's linked in together, and when will Jerusalem be turned down? And so this is, what makes the Olivet Discourse super confusing. Actually, funnily enough, at college, I did an essay on this and really struggled to, understand it all. But basically what Jesus is doing, he's talking about a historical event which happened in 70 AD, which was when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. So he sort of jumps to, I guess, what was from that point of view, short future time. So, somewhere in the AD 30s where Jesus gives his teaching before his death. Jerusalem was destroyed 40 years later. But then, so Jesus kind of jumps between, hey, this is some of the signs of destruction of Jerusalem mixed in with the signs of his return. So there's a lot of jumping back and forth. And so Jesus begins, he says, watch out that no one deceives you. Many will come in my name. I'm the Messiah. And while that still will happen today, and there's false messiahs, there was particularly a lot around the time when Jerusalem was destroyed. We know this from the Jewish historian Josephus. There's false messiahs coming up. And so, Jesus kind of jumps a bit to the future, which kind of happens there. You'll hear of wars, rumors of wars. See that you're not alarmed. Such things must happen. But the end is still to come. Nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom, famines, earthquakes. All these are the beginning of the birth pain. So it's like, okay, that could be talking about Jerusalem's destruction. could also be talking about the end, sort of an and both in there. And then here from verse 9, Jesus seems to be talking probably in the context of the disciples' lifetime, the 40 years before Jerusalem's destruction, around that period. He talks about the disciples being handed over to be persecuted, be hated by all the nations. He'll be betrayed, many false prophets. It's increase of wickedness. But then he kind of jumps to the future a bit more, and the gospel of the kingdom we preach to the whole world as a testimony to nations, and the end will come. And then Jesus talks about this strange reference to, you'll see standing in the holy place, the abomination that causes desolation, spoken through the prophet Daniel. Let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are on the housetop go down and take anything out of their house. Let no one in the field go back for their cloak. How dreadful it will be in those days for pregnant women and nursing mothers. Pray that your flight will not take place in winter or on the Sabbath, for there will be great distress unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and equaled again. So that part of the teaching seems to be sort of about Jerusalem being destroyed. That reference to the abomination that causes desolation from the prophet Daniel. That had, I guess it happened with a Greek king called Antiochus Epiphanes IV, who sacrificed a pig in the Holy of Holies. A couple of hundred years before that, it's around the time of what we call the Maccabees, who fought against the Greek rulers and the Greeks were before the Romans. And so, but then in that, when Jerusalem's destroyed by the Romans, the temple's desecrated. So, this stuff is very, very complex. And so I think it's helpful to sort of get a bit of a background around that, what Jesus is doing. I won't go all into chapter 24, is giving us a framework for Jerusalem as a city, because of its rejection of the Messiah, will be destroyed. And that's an event that's happened in 70 AD. But then Jesus is using the destruction of Jerusalem to point to his return. And so this is what makes it very, very complex teaching, is that we've got mixtures of what's our past, 70 AD, future, so they're intertwined. And then what Jesus is doing that, and this is unique to Matthew, is that as he finishes off, a part of scripture that probably we're familiar with, this idea of the day or hour being unknown. And so Jesus, towards the end of chapter 24, from verse 36, talks about, but the day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. And so, before the flood, people eating, drinking, marrying, and all that. And the flood came along. So it will be with the day of the Lord. Okay, and then that sort of builds into the parables from Matthew chapter 25. So it's a bit of a long-winded way of getting us there to the parables. And the parable of the talents, it feeds, it builds off, I should say, the parable of the 10 virgins. And so what Jesus is doing here in the context of he's teaching here is using the parables, as he has done, to point to deeper spiritual realities. And so Jesus, I love the analogy Jesus uses of a fig tree. When the fig tree is ready to fruit, that's a sign that the summer's coming, that the season of fruit is here. And so he's saying all these sort of apocalyptic signs of the sun being darkened, the moon not giving light, stars falling from heaven, Jerusalem being surrounded by armies, false prophets rising up, all these things, they're signs that you need to be prepared for. In one sense, there's for the disciples, preparation for Jerusalem's destruction by the Romans in 70 AD, and for us as future disciples, preparation for his return. Yeah, we live in a world where there are still wars, rumors of wars, nation rising against nation, famines, earthquakes, terrible things. And as Jesus said, these are birth pains. They're the birth pains that the world will experience. They're signs. And so we need to be prepared. And so Jesus gives us the first parable to help us be prepared, and he uses the analogy of the kingdom being like a wedding banquet, funnily enough. It's a pretty popular image in the Old Testament. They're saying banquet, wedding, Israel being married to Yahweh. And so in the parable of 10 virgins, Jesus says the kingdom of heaven would be like 10 virgins who took their lamps, went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, 5 were wise. Foolish ones took their lamps out but did not take any oil with them. And so as the bridegroom is taking so long, and it gets to midnight and the bridegroom's coming, the foolish virgins have run out of oil, and well, okay, that's no good. And then the foolish ones ask the wise virgins, give us some of your oil, our lamps are going out. And the wise virgins replied, no, there may not be enough for both of us. Said, go to those who sell oil and buy it for yourselves. And then while they're on their way getting oil, the bridegroom arrived, virgins who already went into the wedding banquet, and the door was shut. And the foolish virgins are there knocking, saying, Lord, Lord, open the door for us. And he replied, truly I tell you, I don't know you. And the implication of that is keep watch. And so, you could dive deep into this parable because there's so much to unpack there. But the sort of 10,000 feet summary of that is that be a wise person, be prepared. Jesus is saying, and for us Christians, we've been waiting, we're nearly in the year 2025 now, I've been waiting a long time for Jesus' return. And so it's easy to become slack, i.e., which is what Jesus said at the end of chapter 24, days of Noah, people are eating, drinking, just going on about life, don't think anything's going to happen, suddenly the flood comes. That's what he's building on here, using these parables to solidify his teaching. And so first parable there is about preparation. Having to be able to get into the banquet, you need to have enough oil. And then he builds on to a passage for today, and we got there eventually after about 10 minutes of waffling on, the parable of the talents, or the bags of gold. And so the parable there is quite simple. I'll read out here. It says, again, you'll be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and trusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went out on his journey. The man who had 5 bags of gold went out at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more bags. It's also one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the one who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold bought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. And the one who received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them, and throw that worthless servant outside into darkness, where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's a pretty hard parable. I guess that ending there, it's a depiction of eternal judgment. And when we looked at Lazarus and the rich man and the sort of concept of Hades and that view from the book of Enoch, if you remember, where there's the rooms where the damned souls go, and there's kind of space there for the righteous souls with a fire. Here, judgment's depicted as darkness, weeping and gnashing of teeth. And I guess in the context of what Jesus is talking about of his arrival is that disciples have been given, like in the parable, I guess, bags of gold, talents, and using those talents as faithful servants. There's no way to hammer home of being prepared for the master's return. And there is quite terrifying consequences of that. And there's, a real severity to that, to disobedience, being chucked out, weeping and gnashing of teeth. And and then like in the parable of the 10 virgins, the master of the wedding feast replied, "Truly, I tell you, I do not know you." And so Jesus is laying down here the severe consequences of failing to be ready, failing to read the signs of the times, of failing to understand what will happen to those who are disobedient. Before we sort of talk about that a bit more, probably helpful to kind of look a bit about just some of the little features of a parable. I think one thing that's helpful to understand is talents here. In Greek, the word for talents, it's used as a measure of weight. I think because we use the word talents in English to describe like people's natural abilities, we can sort of read it as like, oh, God's given us 5 or 2, 1 talent, and that's our natural abilities, where the context of the parable is about money, about doing work. And so, look, there's a bit of disagreement about what a talent was worth, but essentially this is sort of the consensus, is that a talent was a measure of weight from somewhere between 26 to 36 kilos. And so depending on if you're using gold or silver would depend on how much value a talent was worth. And so there's modern equivalents, talents like a year's salary. So what's that in Australia? 80 grand, 100 grand. Look, all that. Look, the point is that you get bogged down. All that. The point is that it's a lot of money, and the talent's worth roughly a year's worth of wages. Each of these servants have been given a generous amount to work with, and that's this idea here that we need to understand, is that God has been incredibly generous with us. God has entrusted us with, I guess, to use that word, our talents, our gifts, our spiritual giftings, all that. And there's an expectation that as we look at the signs around us, seeing wars and rumors of wars and false prophets, and how that will ever look when the end is coming, and the sun being darkened and moon not giving its light and all that, is that expectation that we are working towards the kingdom. Is that our master is like, it's gone a long journey, and we don't know when he's going to come back. And so for us, there's this necessity for us to be building and investing into the kingdom, to be faithful servants. I think that's one of the challenges that, I do find, is that it can be easy to forget that the Lord is returning. And something that I'm probably a bit guilty of. And I can know it. I know it, like, in my mind. Like, I know, like, it's a theoretical thing. One day the Lord will return. But it is easy to forget. And so when we forget that, that's when we can become lazy, disobedient, or, to use the language of the parable of 10 virgins, foolish. And so what we here are reminded of is, well, okay, using the analogy of servants to invest money is, well, how are we using what God has given us to build and grow the kingdom? One of the things that I really appreciate about Murray's sermon on the weekend was that end reflection exercise, um, and getting us to imagine burying our talent under the ground. Um, yeah, I found that incredibly helpful for me, because even as someone who's pastor, someone who serves God, there are temptations to not want to be a faithful servant, to yeah bury the gold that God has entrusted with me, and sort of become slack and lazy. Or even that's because of fearfulness, whether it's because of apathy. And if Murray was here, I would say I admired how he I think the context of our church community is with a lot of retirees is actually saying, we can bury our retirement. Um, and that's one of the it really struck home with me is this idea that actually age isn't a barrier. As Maz said on the weekend, Moses was 80 when he led the Israelites out. In a sense, as we get older, we can actually continue to keep bringing more and more to the kingdom. And so that challenge there that he gave us, what might be the biggest thing that God is preparing for you, even in elderly age. I think of someone like a Joni Erickson Tater. If you don't know, when she was a teenager, she dove off the end of a wharf, a pier, into a river, shallow water, and broke her neck and became a quadriplegic. And a lot of people think, well, that's it, life's over. But Joni Erickson, she led a remarkable life of faithfulness, even with such a crippling injury. And so we can begin to think, oh, well, as mobility starts to go down, as all these things of old age start to challenge, well, there's still plenty you can do for the kingdom. And it's and it can sound very cliche, but just shouldn't even say just being able to pray, that in itself is a massive ministry. In my own life, it was late. Been working through there's a ancient spiritual practice which Benedict created called the rule of life. And the rule of life was there to help guide the monks in living in monastery. And there's been many sort of rules built upon since Benedict. And now the idea of as Christians, we should be building our own rule of life. And the rule is meant to be a working document. A lot of Christians now, people that teach the practice of rule of life, and use the analogy of a vine and a trellis, and the rule being like a trellis to help grow the vine, the structure. And setting that rule. And so anyway, well, that's just to say in my life, setting rules and having a practice and starting to pray more and recognizing, okay, prayer changes things. There's the importance there of spending time with the Lord to actually change things in the spiritual world for the kingdom. It's very easy to work very, very hard and diligently to feel like a bit of a martyr, but ultimately what builds up heavenly rewards is that time with the Lord, or that time sowing into the kingdom. And it doesn't matter what sort of stage of life you're at, whether retiree stage, new parent stage like I'm in, full-time work, or whatever it may be, you have an area that you can impact. And if the impact is only one household, well, impact that one household. If it's workplace, impact the workplace. If it's a community, or if it's a global thing. You can do that. And so what I see with the parable of talents is that, and I would actually often kind of see myself as someone that's only been really given one talent in my life. And I thought, okay, Lord, I want to use that talent faithfully. And a recognition that there are Christians out there that have amazing gifts, like a Billy Graham or someone like that, who will transform the world. Will at the end of the day be a very anonymous pastor that, will probably transform the lives of just a small pocket of people. And I'm cool with that. Like, okay, that's how the Lord has called me. And I want to be faithful with that. Whether it be impacting a church of only 120 to 150, I want to make sure I can care for the sheep here. And so for us, that's one of the things that, I guess, the more practical thing to draw out of this is like, okay, what has the Lord called you in? How many bags of gold, how many talents has He given to you according to your ability, and put those to work? It's quite interesting in that parable itself, just the return on investment that the two other servants bring, 100% increase of money. And so I guess the point of the parable, and not to nitpick about about what, if you do this, it'll increase 100-fold giftings or whatever else. Like, I guess that's not really the point of the parable. One of the parable I see is that however, like, God has gifted you, be working towards His return. And again, I'm just framing it around that whole Olivet discourse. Is that, there's some scary signs that are coming ahead. And with some of those scary signs, we need to continue to be faithful in the midst of that. There is something quite terrible about the idea of the Lord saying to those foolish virgins, truly I tell you, I don't know you. Or the wicked, lazy servant of being told, you know what, you're worthless, and you're going outside into darkness. You'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And if you keep reading past the parable, Jesus sort of takes those two stories to help frame, just in a concrete way, how disciples are behaved through stories, and it gives you just a great image of, how life would have been in first century Israel. Then he comes back to what's going to happen with him, and he says, when the Son of Man comes in His glory and all the angels with Him, He'll sit on His glorious throne, and all the nations will be gathered and separate people as a shepherd separates sheep from the goats. And so now He's, so still using, I guess, a bit of parabolic language, but now framing it in a huge context. This is no longer just 10 virgins or 3 servants. This is the whole world. And this is why it's so important to be faithful in that. And then, as it continues on, this is Matthew 25 from verse 34, the king will then say to those on his right, and the right is the side of power and prestige, come, you who are blessed by my Father. Take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. And and then the disciples sort of like, hey, like, when did we do this? We didn't clothe you. We didn't do any of that stuff. And it's like, well, actually, truly I tell you, when you do whatever you do for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did so for me. And it's a wonderful reminder. Part of being a servant, part of the talents / bags of gold and wine and all that is actually serving. Part of the kingdom is, sure, there's elements of prayer and avoiding sin, walking along the narrow road, but caring for others, sense of that it's like caring for Jesus. And so I said before, maybe the Lord has blessed you with lots of talents. Maybe He's blessed you with a few. But let's use them for His glory. And that's a reminder that I need. And one thing, Muzz, you're listening in from home, it really struck me on Sunday of just the importance of, we actually need to be reminded that we do serve a very loving and faithful Master, Jesus, but ultimately He is all powerful and will bring judgment and hell. And it's language that we're not overly comfortable with. It's language that Jesus was quite comfortable in sharing. In fact, it would have been unusual if He didn't talk about hell and judgment in that context. And so, for us, this reminder as we look out to the world around us and see signs of the end, Jesus' return, it is easy to become complacent, to think like the days of Noah, life's not going to change. Nothing's going to change. It's going to kind of keep on going as it always has been. Let these parables be, a framing for us to remember, who we serve. And one day the Master will return. And what's He going to say about what we did with the time, the resources, the money that He has given us? We've been given 1,000 talents, 1 talent, 5 talents. It doesn't matter. And so, friends, I encourage you with that. And again, I think I would invite you. I don't know if Murray was inspired by Ignatius, but it felt to me like a very Ignatian sort of exercise. And Ignatius loved to use imagination, was to imagine Scripture. When you're reading Scripture, imagine yourself in that. I found that, just a really wonderful way to help solidify that parable. Just imagine it. What is the talent you have buried under the ground for whatever reason? And how can you bring that talent out to honor the Lord, to bring glory to Him, and to have those words said, well done, good and faithful servant. So Banter might look different over the next few weeks. We'll sort of see how things track, but this Sunday we have our Celebration Sunday, which is a fantastic time to reflect on what the Lord has done. So a bit of an unusual service this week. So we'll see how Banter looks, because there's not really a sermon per se, but we'll just chat about the blessings of 2024 and what the Lord is doing and what 2025 will look like. So again, thank you everyone for listening in. I'm always amazed at how many of our church congregation actually listen in. I do appreciate it a lot. It means a lot that you listen to, feel like my just ramblings at times. And to know that, even the Lord can use a broken vessel to bring blessing upon others. So, this week may just leave this blessing with you all who are listening in wherever you are. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and may His face shine upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Thanks so much for joining us. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to help others discover this channel. Check out the description if you want to find out more or get in touch with us at the Centre Dural. But in the meantime, praying for God's hand over you as you continue to step into everything Jesus has in store for your life. Be blessed.